Israel didn't wake up one morning and decide to start a war with Iran. What we are watching unfold right now is not the beginning of a conflict. It is the culmination of over 4 decades of aggression by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and an outgrowth of one simple fact. Israel will not allow a genocidal regime that has announced its intention to destroy Israel to acquire nuclear weapons. The tensions that have undergirded geopolitics of the entire Middle East finally exploded into the open, and not in a back-channeled proxy war kind of way. The State of Israel conducted Operation Rising Lion, launching targeted strikes across Iran and taking out nearly all of their top military brass, hitting military bases, nuclear reactors, and Iran's nuclear scientists. For decades, Iran has declared its intent to destroy Israel, what it calls the Little Satan, as well as America, the Big Satan, funding terrorist operations and paramilitary operations in the region, including the murder of hundreds of American troops in Lebanon and Iraq, the devastating October 7th attacks on Israel from Hezbollah in Lebanon, attacks by the Houthis in Yemen, and an attempted assassination of President Trump. In response to Iran's attacks, Israel first tamped down Iran's most noxious proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah. But recently, Israel carried out a direct preemptive attack, conducting surgical airstrikes deep inside Iran without apology. This was not a tit for tat. This was, again, the inevitable outcome of decades of calculated provocation, nuclear blackmail, and terror financing by the Iranian regime. Certain people and organizations like the UN will continue to hyperventilate about escalation and destabilization as if what is currently happening came out of nowhere, or as if Israel started it. They would prefer to have Israel just sit there while a genocidal Islamist regime gears up to lob nuclear missiles at them. So let's be clear. Israel is not starting a war. Rather, Iran has been at war with Israel through its proxies for decades. The only difference is that now Israel is finally going straight to the source, cutting off the head of the octopus that has extended its terror tentacles across the Middle East. Everything happening right now, every missile, every airstrike, makes logical, strategic, and more importantly, moral sense. This is fact. Israel and Iran, nuclear enemies.
Hello， 大家好，我是利恩。2025年6月13日凌晨，以色列发起了代号名为"雄狮崛起行动 "（Operation Rising Lion） 军事行动，空袭了伊朗的纳坦兹核设施、革命卫队高层的住处以及飞弹基地。这次行动的目标主要是阻止伊朗核武计划的进展。以色列情报单位呢声称，伊朗已累积足以制造15枚核弹的裂变物。那么，以色列这次行动也引来了外界2种不同的声音。有人认为以色列出于自身的莫须有的指控而对伊朗进行所谓的军事报复，也有的人认为呢，以色列过去早在伊拉克的海珊时代时候就已经成功的阻止想要利用核武来毁灭以色列国家这样的恐怖行动。那伊朗也在24小时之内呢，就立刻对以色列发射超过100架的无人机。以色列国防军 IDF 表示，所有的防空系统都在全力运作当中。中方之间其实已经不能说是冲突，可以说已经进入到全面战争。而这一切呢，都跟今年3月国际原子能机构 IAEA 的报告表示，伊朗已经累积了275公斤、纯度60%的浓缩铀，这个数量已经远远超过民用核能所需，接近制造核武的门槛。
好恐怖啊！
也因为如此，才引发了以色列这一次，特别是在阻止这一种中东的国家对于以色列可能会核武攻击的防范。所以今天呢，就是要好好的带大家有一个清楚完整的了解以色列与伊朗的冲突最早是从什么时候开始，以及过去以色列的反核主义又是如何的阻止了全球可能掀起核武的争端。我们今天借由班夏皮罗节目当中的一个名为 Facts 事实系列呢，来大家深入一窥以伊之间恩恩怨怨的历史过程，我会适时的做一些补充说明，一起来看吧 ，Let's go。
We begin not in Iran, but in Iraq. In June 1981, Israel launched Operation Opera, a bold preemptive airstrike that destroyed Saddam Hussein's Osirak nuclear reactor near Baghdad. At the time, Iraq had been pursuing nuclear technology under the guise of peaceful energy development. Sound familiar? But Israeli intelligence determined that the reactor, constructed with assistance from French engineers, the French, and partially financed by Italian companies, was in fact intended to produce weapons-grade plutonium. At the time, Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Israeli intelligence feared that if Iraq acquired nuclear weapons, It would pose an existential threat to the Jewish state. With confirmation of Hussein's intentions, 8 Israeli F-16A fighter jets, each carrying a pair of 2,000-pound Mark 84 unguided bombs, took off from Etzion Air Base in the Sinai Peninsula, accompanied by additional fighter jets providing cover. The pilots flew low to avoid radar detection, traveling more than 600 miles across Jordanian and Saudi airspace. Within 80 seconds, the Iraqi nuclear reactor was destroyed. The mission was a stunning success. Immediately after, the world condemned Israel. The UN Security Council unanimously condemned the attack, including the American ambassador, Jeane Kirkpatrick, who later explained how upset she was to do it. And the U.S. State Department under President Reagan also issued criticism, though privately. Reagan expressed concern and admitted that he understood the logic. It was only about a decade later in 1991 when Prime Minister Reagan's strategic foresight became clear. During the Gulf War, American troops confirmed that while Iraq's nuclear capacity had been diminished, Saddam Hussein did in fact intend to develop nuclear weapons. Because Israel had taken nuclear proliferation off the table a decade earlier, American troops were left only to deal with Scud missiles. This entire episode established what is now known in Israel as the Begin Doctrine.
好，说明一下哈，背经主义是以色列非常重要也非常有意思的一个内政与外交政策，可以说是一直深刻的影响以色列至今哈，都是采用背经主义，就是因为以色列在1981年的时候成功的事先阻止了伊拉克海山的奥西拉克的核反应堆。当时虽然联合国都一致谴责以色列这样子事先侵入他国的攻击行为，可是呢，确实到了10年之后，1990年的时候呢，联合国的武器核查机构 UNSCOM 呢，才跟美国情报单位确认说，伊拉克确实曾经试图发展核武，而且奥西拉克被摧毁之后，还转向成秘密的核计划，所以才变成全世界停止了对以色列这样的一个抨击，转为认为是一个非常深谋远虑的行动。最讽刺的地方是，伊拉克是阿拉伯人，那伊朗呢？不是阿拉伯人，伊朗他们是波斯人，是完全不同的民族。而在1980年的时候呢，以色列跟伊朗他们是一个共同合作的国家。那个时候，伊拉克海山的这个秘密核计划对伊朗本身就是一个非常大的威胁。其实1980年的伊朗早就已经先试图空袭过奥西拉克，只是那个时候没有成功，直到隔年以色列的割据行动呢，才终于摧毁了奥西拉克核反应堆。那以色列跟伊朗的这一段合作关系一直是维持到1989年这个霍姆尼去世之后才逐渐瓦解，伊朗才开始变成从亲以色列转向反以色列的立场，开始不断的去支持哈马斯跟真主党等所谓的反以色列组织。
Israel would act unilaterally and preemptively to prevent their hostile enemies from acquiring nuclear weapons. The precedent for foreign policy had been set: security and peace maintained through deterrence and preemptive aggression. It turns out that President Trump's present-day peace through strength approach is not that much different. Meanwhile, Iran was watching all of this. The Islamic Republic, less than 2 years old at the time of the OC Iraq attack, absorbed a powerful message. If they wanted a nuclear weapon, they would have to build their program in deep, fortified secrecy, underground, distributed, plausibly deniable. While Israel had dealt with Iraq's nuclear ambitions decisively in 1981, by the early 1990s, the newly entrenched Islamic Republic of Iran emerged as Israel's biggest threat. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, and his successor, Ali Khamenei, immediately popularized the phrase, "Death to America," and began pushing for Israel's annihilation. As a result, Iran turned its attention to nuclear technology, initially under the pretense of civilian energy production. But behind the scenes, Iranian leaders were covertly laying the groundwork for a weapons program. Under the supervision of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, and later the military-linked Organization of Defensive Innovation and Research, Iran began developing secret nuclear infrastructure. Reports from Western intelligence agencies in the mid-90s pointed to undeclared enrichment facilities, a rapid increase in centrifuge procurement, and possible weaponization research occurring in military labs outside Tehran. The Iranian regime relied on an international black market to obtain the sensitive technology they needed for proliferation. Through ties with Pakistani nuclear scientists, Iran acquired designs for a centrifuge and its component parts. Naturally, North Korea and Russia, strategic opponents of the United States, also provided technicians who offered know-how and reactor components. The Iranian regime's strategy was simple: distribute the program across multiple hidden sites and bury it, literally, under mountains. The most significant of the nuclear facilities is Natanz, the primary uranium enrichment center, camouflaged by reinforced concrete and steel. But the regime also built a site in Arak, where a heavy water plant was capable of producing plutonium, and later also in Fordo, a deeply buried complex that would be allegedly immune from airstrikes. By the late 1990s, Iran was enriching and stockpiling uranium, as well as building out cascades of first-generation centrifuges with the potential, over time, to reach weapons-grade output. The international community rang the alarm bells in periodic reports, but Iran consistently denied officials access to its key sites. Western powers hesitated to act. By 1998, the CIA publicly confirmed Iran's nuclear program was cause for deep concern. Iran's supreme leader publicly issued fatwas against nuclear weapons, but privately, military leaders and IRGC strategists were pursuing a dual-track policy, deny everything while racing toward weapons-grade capacity. In short, the 1990s were a decade of deception for Iran. Iran played the long game, and the world, perhaps distracted by post-Cold War optimism, mostly let them. By the mid-2000s, the Islamic Republic of Iran had transformed its foreign policy into a full-fledged doctrine of proxy warfare. Fearing direct confrontation with Israel or the West, Iran equipped vanguard militias like Hezbollah in Lebanon. In July 2006, Hezbollah launched a 34-day war with Israel by ambushing a patrol near the Lebanese border, killing 3 soldiers and capturing 2 others. The provocation was not spontaneous. It had been planned with the direct coordination of IRGC and facilitated through a web of meetings with Syrian and Lebanese leadership. One of those meetings reportedly took place in Damascus, where senior Iranian officials, including commanders of the Quds Force, the IRGC's elite unit, met with Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Their goal, to solidify the so-called axis of resistance against Israel and the United States. Iran supplied not only the hardware, but also the training, funding, and ideological guidance. Qasem Soleimani, who had later become infamous for orchestrating attacks across the region, was by this time already deeply involved in strategizing Hezbollah's war plan. Israel responded with a massive air campaign and ground incursion into southern Lebanon, targeting launch sites, bunkers, and Hezbollah command centers. The Israeli Air Force struck over 7,000 targets, but Hezbollah's use of human shields, deep bunkers, and dispersed rocket cells made its total eradication impossible. Even though the United States and President George W. Bush offered diplomatic cover to Israel in the early stages, pressure soon mounted for a ceasefire. By August 2006, UN Resolution 1701 brought the fighting to a close. Hezbollah claimed a divine victory. This trial served as a test run for the Iranian regime's new model of warfare, tunnel guerrilla warfare through state-sponsored militias. Tehran learned it could strike Israel without inviting direct retaliation while gaining influence across capitals in the Arab world. This strategy would echo in Gaza, in Syria, in Yemen. Eventually, it would reach Israel from Iran itself.
好，这边说明一下，伊朗由过去的跟以色列的正面战争呢，就转变为利用这种所谓的代理人组织来进行这种以色列无法有理由直接报复伊朗的一种攻击方式。那目前有3大代理人，就是黎巴嫩的真主党，还有就是我们非常熟悉的巴基斯坦的哈马斯，也就是控制加萨走廊，在2023年10月6号突袭的这个哈马斯。那另外一个就是也门的胡塞武装。所以这也是为什么我们看到，就是说，先不论以哈的冲突谁伤了这个所谓无辜老百姓、平民的伤亡人数比较多，你就其一个高度来看，你才会从这里知道说，为什么以色列这一次要打哈马斯。某种程度上，以色列其实一直想要把伊朗的这3大代理人呢，好好的清除干净，因为这3大代理人只要没有消失，永远都会不断的向以色列发动恐怖行动、发动攻击，这个是没有办法避免的情况。因为说到底，背后就是一场以色列跟伊朗的战争模式。好，大家这样子才有一个宏观的理解。
太残暴了。
Meanwhile, Israel's attempts to stop development of nuclear weapons by hostile neighbors continued apace. In 2007, Israel launched Operation Outside the Box, an airstrike directed at a suspected Syrian nuclear facility. Naturally, the head of the IAEA condemned Israel. By the early 2010s, international pressure on Iran's nuclear program began to reach a tipping point. Years of inspections, sanctions, cyber attacks had slowed but not stopped Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran was enriching uranium up to 20%, building a stockpile that could be weaponized in a matter of months, according to intelligence.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God?
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Enter the Obama administration. In 2013, President Barack Obama began secret negotiations with Tehran, culminating in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, signed in July 2015. The deal was struck between the US, UK, France, Russia, China, and Germany, representing a massive shift in Western doctrine toward the Iranian regime in favor of concession, not coercion. Under the terms of the JCPOA, Iran agreed to limit uranium enrichment to levels suitable for civilian use, reduce its stockpile, and cap its number of centrifuges. In exchange, Iran essentially received big bags of cash. They were offered between $100 and $150 billion in sanctions relief and a green light for increased oil exports. The JCPOA also included provisions for international inspections, but with deadly limitations. International inspectors would not be permitted to enter military sites, which were widely believed to be the locations of covert nuclear development. Snapback sanctions were included in theory, but proved politically unworkable in practice. The JCPOA also provided zero limits on Iranian use of funds for terrorism and ballistic missile development, and the JCPOA allowed Iran to pursue its nuclear program without limitation beyond its 10-year timeline, which would have expired this year. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu famously addressed a joint session of Congress in March 2015 to oppose the deal, warning, quote, "This deal will not change Iran for the better. It will only change the Middle East for the worse." He was right. Emboldened by newfound legitimacy, flush with cash, the Iranian regime doubled down on its regional terror war. Hezbollah expanded and deployed fighters to Syria. Hamas enjoyed renewed funding and dug tunnels beneath Gaza. The Houthis launched drone and missile attacks against Saudi Arabia. By 2017, signatories were quietly acknowledging that Iran was testing the boundaries of the deal, if not outright violating it. The JCPOA, as President Donald Trump said, was a disaster. It may have postponed Iran's direct confrontation with Israel, but guaranteed it would come later and under more deadly circumstances. In contrast, President Trump's business sense told him the JCPOA was a horrendously lopsided deal. His administration launched a maximum pressure campaign, where the United States withdrew from the agreement, imposed crippling sanctions, and carried out the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the head of Iran's Quds military force.
The United States military successfully executed a flawless precision strike that killed the number one terrorist anywhere in the world, Qasem Soleimani.
Deterrence was reasserted, and then Joe Biden became president. He quickly created distance between the United States and allies like Saudi Arabia and Israel, while simultaneously reaching out to the Ayatollahs in an attempt to revive the JCPOA. The result was the most heinous attack on Jews since the Holocaust. On October 7, 2023, the Iran-backed terrorist group Hamas carried out an unprecedented massacre of Israeli civilians, firing thousands of rockets while militants and Gazan civilians infiltrated Jewish communities, killing 1,200 people, dragging 250 hostages back to Gaza. Intelligence quickly uncovered Iranian involvement. Funding estimates ranged from $10 million all the way up to $500 million. And IRGC officials met with Hamas leadership just days before the attack. Meanwhile, the Qatari regime provided billions in support to Hamas, Qatar, of course, being a close ally of the Iranians. October 7th was masterminded in part by Iran. Israel responded by invading Gaza, determined to retrieve its hostages and finish off Hamas. In April 2024, Iran launched drones and missiles directly at Israel. Israel intercepted all of them. In September 2024, Israel carried out the aptly nicknamed Operation Grim Beeper, cutting Hezbollah off at the knees. In October 2024, Iran launched even more drones at Israel. Israel responded by striking military infrastructure in Syria. With Hamas on the ropes, Hezbollah crippled, the Syrian regime collapsed completely in December 2024. Israel had effectively devastated nearly all of Iran's proxies sent to destroy it between October 7th and December 2024. But Iran kept building the nuclear weapons. In fact, according to the IAEA, it accelerated its efforts, and despite President Trump's best efforts to negotiate a nuclear deal that would end Iran's nuclear development, the Ayatollahs continued to insist on precisely that development, while threatening both Israel and the United States.
这边要说明一下，其实这个事情本来未必会演变成以色列的一个主动的空袭行为，因为原本是美国总统川普呢一直想要跟伊朗重启谈判，他们也谈了很多轮就是希望说伊朗能够停止60%纯度的铀浓缩，回到2015年的 JCPOA 伊朗核协议所定的这个限制。可是伊朗呢，很怪。就是他们一直说没有问题，我们愿意谈判，可是我们呢不愿意停止浓缩铀，而且要美国解除制裁，就变成这个谈判就看起来很像是伊朗在片面拖延时间。为什么呢？因为每一次都愿意跟美国谈，可是没有一次任何的松口表示。所以原定是要在6月15号阿曼举行美伊的第6轮的核谈判，可是呢好死不死你前面5轮。你伊朗的态度已经让美国跟以色列都觉得非常奇怪，没有诚意，但是都愿意出席。那一直到 IAEA 6月12号的时候呢，在这个第6次的谈判6月15号前 ，IAEA 6月12号国际原子能机构发布了报告，指控伊朗违反了核不扩散协议，并且他们认为伊朗可能会在数个月之内就完成制造核武。
We're going to begin with breaking news from Vienna, where the UN nuclear watchdogs passed a resolution that says Iran has failed to comply with its nuclear safeguard obligations. It's the first such resolution the International Atomic Energy Agency has adopted in almost 20 years. It was put forward by France, the UK, and Germany, and it passed with 19 votes in favour, 3 against, and 11 abstentions. Iran's condemned the resolution, calling it a political decision without technical or legal foundations. I want to give you a closer look at the resolution that's been passed by the IAEA. It states that Iran has failed to cooperate with the agency's safeguards agreement. It says Iran has sanitized locations, impeded verification activities, and provided inaccurate explanations. It also notes that Iran has failed to provide credible explanations for the presence of uranium particles found at 3 undeclared locations. 2 are near Tehran and 1 inside the city. And it says Iran conducted undeclared activity at 1 site between 2009 and 2018. Hashim Akbar is joining me now live from Vienna. Hashim, you broke that news just an hour or so ago. Tell us about the significance of this. First time in 20 years that a ruling like this has been put in place.
Very significant, a major political development with the International Atomic Energy Agency saying that Iran has been in breach of its comprehensive safeguards agreements when it comes to non-proliferation of its program. And this is quite significant because this is the first time in 20 years that it happens. And now the agency says that that Iran has not been transparent about 2 key components of its program. First of all, the traces of uranium that were found by international inspectors in secret locations. And this is one of the reasons why the resolution was very strong in its wording. They said we bumped into particles in secret locations, which means they were being operating for quite some time. And when the Iranians discovered we were going to those places, they tampered with the evidence there. This explains the term sanitization that has been used by the resolution. Number 2, they say we need to go to those places and we need the Iranians to give us an indication. We have to see the evidence that that material that was used there, particularly contaminated equipment or nuclear material, we have to see it. If they mixed it with something else, we need to see proof of that. If they are using it in a parallel program underground, we have to have it. 1. 2, Turkozabad is one of those locations where they believe from 2009 to 2018 Iran was operating a program. Then they discovered traces of uranium and suddenly all the equipments there disappeared. They want to have access to those equipment. Number 2, they say there is absolutely no logical explanation to the fact that you are the only country on earth. You don't have nuclear weapons, but the amount of enriched uranium that you have is massive, very close to the level where you could have nuclear bombs. Now, the consensus here at the International Atomic Energy Agency is that 400 kilograms are already purified at a level of 60%. The Iranians need to refine it just to 90% to get to the weapons grade level. I asked someone here, how much time does it take? He said it could be just a few weeks. And then when I said, if you have that, and if you want to devise the nuclear head along with the trigger, initiator, and the explosive devices, how much time does it take? He said few months, no more than 5 months. And this explains the sense of urgency that the international community has decided to come up with when it comes to this agreement, this resolution, the strongest so far blaming Iran for not being transparent with the international community.
所以川普就赶紧公开警告说，伊朗你再不停止浓缩铀的话，那以色列可能会采取行动，我到时候就帮不了了。好，那想当然了呢，伊朗呢也没有在怕。好，所以呢，以色列6月13号就正式发起了雄狮崛起的空袭行动。所以你会发现哈，其实以色列他这一次空袭，并不是一开始就单方面片面的，他是等了川普这边的5轮谈判，看不出伊朗有任何的诚意之后才决定就是不再等川普行动了。当然有人是质疑说，这个时间点上为什么又会变成说，明明川普还能够跟伊朗继续谈判，却没有完成第6次，就变成这样子的一个冲突行为？那这背后有没有我们以前提到的所谓的深层政府 CIA 跟美国军工复合体这边的操作呢？是不是有人想要促使美伊之间的谈判破裂？好，这个我认为是很有可能的。有人不会愿意川普跟伊朗这边达成协议嘛，宁可看到两国正式开打。好，所以以色列就发动正式攻击。
All of that built toward what happened yesterday, June 13th, 2025. Israel carrying out Operation Rising Lion, dispatching hundreds of fighter jets and drones to strike over 100 nuclear and military targets across Iran. The Natanz enrichment site was hit. The Isfahan conversion plant went up in smoke. The regime's top commanders, Hossein Salami, Mohammad Bagheri, Ghulam Ali Rashid, and most of its top nuclear scientists were all assassinated. And according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the operation is just beginning. Let's be very clear again. What we are witnessing right now is the consequence of decades of Iranian Islamist ambition colliding with immovable Israeli resolve. Iran has pursued a clear strategy since 1979: undermine the West, destroy Israel, dominate the Middle East by any means necessary, whether through terror proxies, nuclear blackmail, or open missile warfare. From the 1981 Operation Opera in Iraq to the Iranian regime's 1990s covert nuclear buildup, from the 2006 war in Lebanon to Obama's 2015 deal, from Trump's Soleimani strike to October 7th, 2023, and now Operation Rising Lion, Israel has not wavered in its belief that it must act before it is too late. And yet the world keeps acting surprised. But here's the truth. Israel is doing what every sovereign nation has the right and the obligation to do. It is defending its citizens. It is preserving its future. And it is sending a message to the tyrants of death cults everywhere. You might threaten, plot, even launch an attack, but if you cross a line, there will be consequences. Every authoritarian regime, from Beijing to Moscow to Pyongyang, is watching. If Israel succeeds in deterring Iran and dismantling its nuclear infrastructure, it reaffirms a basic principle, one President Trump has led with through 2 terms: peace through strength. The free world must have a spine. If the West succumbs to its suicidal empathy, if the international community continues to treat aggressors and defenders as moral equals, this conflict won't end in Iran. It will spread.